Hi there, Christian Henson from Spitfire here to show you what has been my secret weapon for some years now, alternative strings, formerly known as artisans. I was talking to Olafur Arnalds the other day about sample libraries, and he made the distinction between libraries that are kind of very accurate and enable you to compose stuff so it can be passed on to an orchestrator, represented to your director, how it's going to sound like when you get your orchestra in, and then you get them to kind of vibe it up. And sample libraries which are kind of an inspiration, almost a collaborative tool. And this is very much that kind of library. Now, I'm actually working on an album project that has used this library extensively. And the reason I'm using this and not, say, for example, solo strings or Sacconi is because I wanted a slightly kind of vibier, edgier playing style. And it's very difficult to represent with the more accurate sounding sample libraries. So what I do with the alternative strings is actually kind of work almost more with a collaborative method. So I'm playing the samples, they're feeding back to me, and I'm shaping my composition around them. So the first example is very much how the library was designed, which is kind of a Nick Cave, Warren Ellis, edgy kind of sound, which has a rawness but also an aching beauty to it. And what I'm using here is just the cello. Basically what we've asked the player to do, Chris Worsey in this case, is to find the note and respond to it in a manner that is kind of personal to him. We've done a couple of round robins per note, which is why I've got the reset from transport on, so that I can control every time I hit play. It's the same phraselets, and they're not even phrases, same performance style playing every time. So again, I can shape the arrangement around that. And I'm going to use my palette gear to control expression to dynamic, again, to shape his performance around what I'm trying to do. So let's have a listen to this. Basically, backing track is a combination of the amazing flight loops from Albion 3, which I go to all the time, and David Coulter's Saw in DC Noisemaker. So let's have a go at this. So a very interesting and engaging intro there to something that will probably build. I think the other fun thing is, because of the dryness and upfrontness of the sample, and it's like right dead in the center, you can apply, I've just slapped a kind of Logic amp on with some reverb on, and that again just gives it a slightly grittier quality. Love a bit of filth, me. So let's go on to this next example, which I believe is with the violin. So what's great about a library that's recorded dry is it really gives you kind of ultimate control over how it sounds. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing an entire orchestra like this, because eventually it'll just feel kind of washy when you add reverbs and this, that, and the other. You don't get a sense of place. But if you're surrounding it with samples that are recorded in a room, in a space, all it takes is a bit of reverb to place it in that space. However, in this example, what I'm doing is I've kind of imagined the way that Hans Zimmer approaches, say, for example, an ethnic flute. And this is kind of an ultra-produced sound, whereby it's that kind of technique where you've recorded something really, really quietly, like imagine a female voice, and it's sitting on top of a large orchestra, yet that's punching through. So what I tend to do is swamp it in delays and extra special reverbs. Let's have a look at what I've done here. So basically, I'm using long harmonics, which I've transposed so they sit in the same register as just the basic longs here, and they're both sitting on the same MIDI channel. And then I've slapped on a bit of your bog standard Logic delay, and then my reverb de jour, the Fab Filter Pro R, and I've got a heavy modulated ambience A on it. So it's almost like, it reminds me of the Eventide kind of, is it Blue or something like that, that kind of sound. So we take it from that kind of mystical place into the reality of the orchestra and rather a nice sounding choir. Now the next is kind of quite an interesting use of alternative strings because I'm actually placing it within the orchestra. Now the reason I'm not using Spitfire solo strings, which is actually recorded in the same room, is again there's an accuracy to them which provides you, it's just brilliant for building up arrangements. But I wanted something that really sounded massively kind of virtuosic, and in fact this is going to be replaced by an amazing lead violinist. So what I'm using here are just basically the spiccatos, but you'll hear there's a spirit to them. Every spiccato is slightly different and has a real sense of vibrato, all of that kind of stuff, which just gives it this flair that's representing to my client what it's going to sound like with a kind of virtuosic stand-up performance as opposed to just the front desk. You'll hear... Now, if you repeat them, they just sound like kind of normal shorts. But actually, if you listen closely, each of these notes are very different, slightly differing lengths. And it's that kind of random flamboyance that I like that gives it that slightly kind of, I don't know, purple velvet cloaked kind of virtuosic feel. So run that with this track. Excuse my sloppy cello programming there. This is actually going to be replaced by a live orchestra. So it's basically, again, it's a representation to my client of how it's going to sound. But I think you'll agree that the violin has a kind of an eccentricity, a flamboyancy that is appropriate in this example. And again, all I've done is added a generous amount of this fab filter, which is... I like this reverb because it doesn't require a dongle, so I'm a bit of a travelling troubadour of a composer at the moment, so I can take this around with me. But that, I just literally whack a little bit on the bus there, and it sits in the orchestra nice, totally believable. And the thing to remember with these, because they're being recorded as kind of solo instruments that you can, in the example of the kind of the more Hans Zimmer-y, ultra-produced method, you want them centre. But if you want to form the alternative strings into kind of a band of their own, make sure that you pan them according to how they would sit. Anyway, this is how I've been using these strings as my secret weapon over the years. Like all sample instruments, they're instruments. You have to kind of get to learn how to use them. And with these particular ones, as I said, they're kind of collaborative, so you have to respond to how they're playing. I've not had a chance to really get into the viola and Mary Scully's bass, but that's something I'm really looking forward to doing over the forthcoming weeks. As always, thank you so much for spending some time watching how I employ these tools. If you're new to the channel, hit subscribe. Lots of exciting stuff coming up. And if you like what we do, hit like. See you soon. Bye-bye.